Imagine this. 1997. A government building in Washington, D.C., about to be torn down. In the basement, workers find an old metal filing cabinet. Nothing special, right? Government buildings are full of forgotten things. Forgotten desks, forgotten records, forgotten truths. But this cabinet was different. It was locked, and nobody had the key. When they finally forced it open, they found rows of folders stamped with words most of us never see. Confidential, restricted, do not release. Inside were stories that had never been taught in classrooms. Stories that weren't meant to be remembered. Stories that proved history isn't always what we're told. One of those stories began in 1932 in rural Alabama. It was called The Experiment That Never Ended. Hundreds of poor black men were told they would receive free medical treatment from the government. In the grip of the Great Depression, this was a lifeline. They trusted the doctors. They trusted the white coats. Trusted the promise of care. What they didn't know is that they were never meant to be cured. The program was run by the U.S. Public Health Service. The men had syphilis, a devastating disease that slowly destroys the body and the brain. But the doctors didn't treat it. They watched it. They studied it. They meticulously documented its horrifying progression. They let it spread. And here's the worst part. Even after penicillin was discovered, a simple cure that could have saved every single one of them, the doctors withheld it. They actively prevented the men from getting treatment elsewhere. For 40 years, the experiment continued. As men went blind, men lost their sanity, men died in agony. Their wives were infected. Their children were born with the disease. Their families never knew the truth. The government called it research. The men called it trust. Only one of them was right. The study only ended in 1972, when a whistleblower leaked the story to the press, sparking public outrage that led to major changes in laws protecting human subjects in studies. But for hundreds, it was too late. Let's go back a little further to 1921. There was a town where black Americans had built something truly extraordinary. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, a neighborhood called Greenwood flourished. It was so prosperous, so vibrant. It was known as Black Wall Street. It had its own doctors, lawyers, business owners, families living in beautiful homes, with dignity and success. Greenwood was more than a neighborhood. It was proof that freedom and prosperity could be real for black Americans, even in a deeply segregated nation. Till one night it wasn't. A rumor spread, a false allegation about a young black man and a white woman in an elevator. Fear quickly turned to anger. Anger ignited into unimaginable violence. White mobs, some of them deputized and armed by city officials, descended on Greenwood. They didn't just riot, they waged war. They looted and burned homes. They destroyed businesses built over generations. They hunted people in the streets. Private planes, like bombers, flew overhead, dropping fire onto the rooftops below. People ran for their lives. People hid. People died. By morning, 35 square blocks of a thriving community were gone, reduced to ash and rubble. Thousands were left homeless, rounded up, and held in internment camps. The death toll is still debated, but it's estimated to be in the hundreds. Then, for decades, something almost as shocking happened. Silence. No one spoke of it. It wasn't taught in schools. It wasn't written in textbooks. It was erased. Not because it didn't happen, but because remembering it made people uncomfortable. It was a story buried in shame and denial. A ghost haunting a city that refused to look back. Let's switch scenes to the early 1900s, to a factory floor filled with young women. They were hired for a glamorous new job, painting watch dials with glowing paint so they could be read in the dark. It was delicate, precise work, and they were good at it. To get a finer point on their brushes, their supervisors taught them a little trick. Just put the tip of the brush between your lips. They were told the paint was completely harmless, absolutely safe. They joked about the glow. They painted their fingernails with it, their teeth, just for fun. They'd go home at night, faintly glowing in the dark, and they thought it was beautiful. But the paint contained radium, a highly radioactive substance. Slowly, insidiously, their bodies began to fail. Their teeth fell out. Their jaws literally crumbled, a condition that became known as radium jaw. Their bones weakened and fractured without reason. They were in constant agonizing pain. When they went to doctors, they weren't believed. Companies denied all responsibility, hiring their own experts to claim the women were lying or suffering from other illnesses. The girls were called hysterics until they started dying. One by one, their tragic suffering finally revealed the truth. The glow wasn't beauty. It was a slow, painful death sentence. But these radium girls, as they came to be known, didn't suffer in vain. They fought back. They sued the companies. Their fight was one of the first major cases where a corporation was held responsible for the health of its employees. Their pain forced industries to admit the dangers they had hidden and led to new workplace safety standards that protect millions of workers to this day. Now, fast forward to the 1950s, the Cold War, a time when fear ruled everything. Fear of enemies, fear of secrets, fear of losing control. In this climate of paranoia, the Central Intelligence Agency began a top-secret illegal program. It was called MKUltra. Its purpose was chillingly simple: to find a way to control the human mind. They wanted to create truth serums, methods for brainwashing, and even mind-controlled assassins. To do this, they tested a terrifying array of techniques. They used drugs like LSD, often giving them to people without their knowledge or consent. They experimented with hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, and psychological torture. Some subjects were volunteers, sure, but many were not. They experimented on prisoners, patients in mental health facilities, and ordinary citizens who had no idea they were part of a government experiment. They were given substances that shattered their perception of reality, altered their memories, and fractured their very sense of self. Some people never recovered. Some were driven to insanity. Some died. And because this was one of the government's darkest secrets, most of the records were intentionally destroyed in the 1970s to hide the program's full extent. Officially, it barely existed. Unofficially, it happened. It was a terrifying chapter where a powerful agency, driven by fear, decided that a few broken minds were an acceptable price to pay for national security. Let's visit one more story from that dusty filing cabinet. The year is 1932, the same year the Tuskegee study began. Thousands of World War I veterans marched to Washington, D.C. They weren't there to protest. They weren't there to riot. They were there to politely ask for what they had been promised. A bonus payment for their service, money they desperately needed to survive the Great Depression. These men had fought for their country. They'd risked their lives in the trenches of Europe. They had watched their friends die. Now, they were hungry, homeless, and forgotten. They built makeshift camps, shanty towns, near the Capitol building. With their families, they waited. They hoped. They trusted that their government would see their plight and help them. Instead of help, they were met with force. The government, fearing a revolution, ordered the army to disperse them. American soldiers were sent against American veterans. General Douglas MacArthur led the charge. Tanks rolled through the camps. Tear gas filled the air. Fires burned their crude shelters to the ground. These veterans, heroes of the nation, were driven out of the Capitol like criminals. The incident became known as the Bonus March. History books often frame it as a necessary action to maintain order. The veterans, however, called it what it was: a profound betrayal.
Oh.
The man who found that filing cabinet sat alone in that basement for hours, reading, learning, and finally understanding. He realized something incredibly important. History isn't just about what happened. It's about what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. Some truths are hidden to protect individuals, but many more are hidden to protect power, to protect institutions, to protect a comfortable version of the past. But all these buried stories have one thing in common. They were real. They happened to real people. People who trusted, people who suffered, people who fought, and people who deserved to be remembered. He closed the final folder. The cabinet was empty now, but his mind wasn't. He understood something most people never get the chance to. The past isn't really gone, it's just buried. It's always waiting, not to be feared, but to be acknowledged. Because ignoring history, burying the uncomfortable truths, doesn't make them go away. It only makes it more likely that we will repeat them. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into our hidden history as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that deserve to be told.